Joe Rogan had a chance to be a consequential figure in American history, but he didn't take it. He had a chance to put it all on the line and stand up for what is good and decent and fair and just, but he opted against taking the risk. Instead, just like every other public figure does when they hear the woke rage mob outside their window with their torches and pitchforks, Joe Rogan bent the knee like a little bitch, showed his belly like a scared puppy, said how very sorry he was, promised to do better, and assured everyone that henceforth there would be a content advisory anytime he said anything that might be deemed heretical by the Ministry of Cultural Hygiene. In other words, instead of giving the correct response, which consists of 2 upturned middle fingers accompanied by the words fuck and you, Joe Rogan opted instead to say, I think I very much like getting paid $140 million to be a guy who talks to a microphone for several hours a day, so hold that pistol to my head, Daddy, and tell me which acts of performative atonement I need to perform. There is a crucial difference between this attempt to silence Joe Rogan and all previous such attempts, but amazingly, I have yet to hear anyone mention it. Now, cancellation campaigns against radio and TV hosts by the organized left are nothing new. They spent 30 years trying to pull Rush Limbaugh off the airwaves, organizing boycotts of his advertisers and so on, and they've spent a similarly long period of time trying to deplatform whoever is the most highly rated primetime host on Fox News at any given year. But Joe Rogan doesn't broadcast on the public airwaves. Joe Rogan doesn't have a show on basic cable TV. If you want to listen to Joe Rogan's program live in its entirety every day, you have to first pay for a Spotify membership, then you have to open up the app and specifically seek out his program. So Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, because the woke rage mob sends us nothing but the finest, right? They don't think you should just be prohibited from unwanted thoughts that you might accidentally encounter while spinning the radio dial or flipping the TV channels. And that is monstrous enough on its own, but they want to go much farther yet. They want to ban you from viewing and listening to content that you paid money for, which is unavailable to the general public and which you are consuming in the privacy of your own brain. Now, in a slightly different but no less odious context, try to imagine a government ministry that sends a guy out to your neighborhood to check everybody's mailboxes and make sure they're not receiving any pornography. That sounds pretty horrifying, doesn't it? It sounds pretty antithetical to basic speech and privacy rights, doesn't it? But is it any less stark raving mad than proposing in total seriousness the banning of a podcast on a private media platform? I couldn't help chuckling over the weekend when some people on the right were trying to make a cause celeb out of Joe Rogan, like he was going to be the new standard bearer in the free speech wars. Like, he's one of our own now, and he's going to lead us into the breach to do battle with the woke hordes. And I'm sitting there thinking, you poor dears, you're going to be so disappointed on Monday when this guy issues the standard obligatory public self-flagellation hostage video, which he of course did. And I wish people on the right would stop doing that. Each time some celebrity gets in trouble for stepping off the woke plantation, it's like people on the right instantly start swooning, thinking they've got a new ally, when the person in all likelihood still thinks all the same stupid leftist things that they thought last week. So maybe before the next time you start making googly eyes at Joe Rogan, bear in mind he's still the guy who endorsed Bernie Sanders in the last election because the corpse of Joe Biden wasn't woke enough. But if I'm Spotify right now, I gotta tell you, I am building a whole ad campaign around the fact that my platform is now a Neil Young, Joni Mitchell free zone. All the music you could ever want, without the 2 most insufferably annoying geriatric Canadian solo artists who ever lived. On Saturday, when Joni Mitchell announced she was joining Neil Young's brave crusade against free speech on behalf of the international pharmaceutical industry, I heard a rumor that Google's servers were briefly crashed by people under 40 searching, who the hell is Joni Mitchell? And people over 40 searching, Joni Mitchell's still alive? Jim Eagle says if they paved Paradise and put up a parking lot that Joni Mitchell was buried in, it would actually be an improvement. And I think I'm inclined to agree. Meanwhile, Neil Young was heard to say, "Hey, hey, my, I'm no longer on Spotify." From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where Justin Trudeau turned up asking for asylum the other day, but we turned him away under our strict no beta cuck douchebag policy. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. And to you too, Mr. Canadian Trucker, you're doing some fine work. I am your eponymous host and humble servant, and as you know, I am a staunch believer in giving credit where credit is due, irrespective of the identity of the person who has earned it. And so I need to open tonight by giving credit to the corpse of President Joe Biden, who, for the first time in his many thoroughly undistinguished decades in national public office, has begun an important conversation on an important topic. It's been delightful this past week or so since Biden publicly announced his racial and sexual litmus test for his upcoming Supreme Court nominee to hear people starting to ask, after nearly 60 years, the basic questions, the important questions about the matter of affirmative action and about all forms of non-merit-based hiring more broadly. Since I'm someone who tends to be a big fan of taking things back to first principles, of dealing in terms with mutually comprehensible definitions, so it's really a breath of fresh air to hear questions being asked like, what is affirmative action supposed to do? Who is it supposed to help? What are the results supposed to look like? When should we expect to see them? How long do we wait? For entirely too long now, affirmative action has been just another social engineering experiment that grew into an entrenched, institutionalized feature of government. A thing we do because, well, this is the way we've always done it. Nobody around here can remember when we did it a different way. I touched on this just briefly at the close of Friday's episode, but let's quickly rehash. The central original promise of affirmative action was that if we allocate certain privileges and certain opportunities to certain people on the basis of their race or their gender, rather than on the basis of their aptitude and their qualifications, then certain disadvantaged population subgroups would gain economic equilibrium or something close to parity with the majority group. But just like the mask mandates and the vaccine passports, there's no real-world evidence, no body of data to which anyone can point that indicates affirmative action hiring policies at the federal level have succeeded in any measure, large or small, in redressing the imbalances that it was intended to redress. And we've been doing it, again, for about 60 years. In a society with a system like ours, a class-blind meritocracy where the only limits to achievement are the individual's talent and work ethic, when you start hiring according to racial and gender quotas, that's a pretty big departure from the moral foundations on which democratically self-governing societies are ordinarily built. The biggest and most important of those foundations in the American system is that the rights of the individual, the rights he enjoys by dint of his existence as a human being, the rights that governments are powerless to grant or to revoke, those rights are supposed to be held inviolate. And the business of government, the highest and most important duty of government, is not to add to or subtract from those rights, but to safeguard them against any and all depredations. In each act of affirmative action racial quota hiring, that compact between state and citizen is broken, because the state is then saying, yes, I know we promised you a society in which you would be able to ascend as far as ability and hard work would take you, and look, you're fully qualified for this position you're applying for, and all things being equal, you're the person we would pick. But we're going to give the job instead to this other guy who isn't qualified, because if we choose him over you, theoretically it will help to create a more just and equitable society. And affirmative action is a lot like vote fraud, really, because you can't confer an unfair advantage on one person without screwing another person who did everything right and played by all the rules. Every fraudulent vote disenfranchises one lawful voter, and every race-based or gender-based hiring decision unfairly punishes a person who fairly earned the position and would otherwise have gotten it. But it's not just a raw deal for the person who gets screwed out of the job for having the wrong skin color or the wrong sex organs. All too often, affirmative action sucks just as much for the people who are supposed to be its frontline beneficiaries. Clarence Thomas has written powerfully and eloquently on this point, and frankly, I think all affirmative action true believers should be forced to read his autobiography and grapple with the points he raises therein. Clarence Thomas didn't need no damn affirmative action. That guy earned every job and every position he ever had. But throughout his time in the federal government, both in the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission and elsewhere, it was always assumed by his colleagues that he was an affirmative action quota hire. Each place he went, he had to prove himself all over again, work twice as hard, do twice as well, just in order to shake the perception that he was getting a free ride on the basis of his skin color. When a guy like that, who has actually walked down that street in the real world and who also is the owner of one of the most brilliant legal minds of the last 100 years, when that guy tells you affirmative action is a wrong-headed, counterproductive thing, hasn't he at least earned the right to be listened to? Well, hell no he hasn't, says Joy Behar, the crusty, pasty old white lady who's also the self-appointed sole arbiter of who's really black and who isn't. She started going on some rant the other day in which I think she actually said, or at least strongly implied, that there aren't any black justices on the Supreme Court currently, and when one of her vapid co-hosts chimed in and said, Clarence Thomas? She says, okay, he's black, I'll give him that, but he doesn't represent the black community. And wow, where does one even begin in unpacking all the ways in which woke Joy Behar just outed herself as a racist in 20 words or less? If you were trying to invent a monstrously racist thing to say, could you do much better than that? He's black, I'll give him that. Gosh, thank you so much, Joy Behar. I'm sure Justice Thomas is thrilled and delighted to hear the news that you have grudgingly conceded him his blackness. And what if she hadn't? Would he have to come down to View headquarters and surrender his official black guy card? Is that how that works? And the second half of the statement is just as shockingly racist as the first half. He doesn't represent the black community. Thank you again, geriatric ginger white lady, for educating us on where the dividing lines are between blackness and non-blackness, and also on what the views of the black community are. I mean, she literally is putting thoughts in the heads of all black people in the country, lecturing them on what they like and what they don't like, on who is allowed to be in the black community and who isn't. And the racism on the left, it's grown more casual as it has grown more pervasive. When I listen to that Joy Behar clip, in which she speaks as if she is both the arbiter of blackness and the spokeswoman for all black Americans, or I would submit when any decent person of conscience listens to such things, the natural reaction is to think, wow, that red-haired lady is incredibly patronizing and paternalistic toward black people. She really sounds racist as hell. But if you're a person who watches The View for non-ironic purposes, and it grieves me that such people exist, if you're an all-in, woke, leftist, true believer, you can listen to those same words and not even think twice about it or bat an eye, because Joy Behar is on the side of the angels. And Clarence Thomas is an evil right-wing conservative. So obviously it's Clarence Thomas who's really the anti-black racist, just like Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy. Because if you're a black guy who doesn't think all the correct things that the pearly white Democrat Party establishment says you could think, or should think, well, you ain't black. Joe Biden was very clear on that point back during the campaign. So in the mind of the true believing, View-watching leftist Kool-Aid drinker, Joy Behar is blacker than Clarence Thomas, because one's blackness is determined solely by one's adherence to the orthodoxies of the Democrat Party. It's also worth noting that when Clarence Thomas was nominated to the Supreme Court, President George H.W. Bush never came out and said, okay, we just had the black justice die, so I promise I'm going to nominate another black guy. Because how insulting and demeaning would that be toward the person you ultimately select? When Biden stood up there and reaffirmed his intention to nominate a black woman judge, It was a gigantic slap in the face to whomever he winds up picking, because he has already said right out loud in public that he's selecting this person not on the basis of her skills or qualifications or experience or legal philosophy, but because she hasn't got a dick and she can't get a sunburn. Is that how you would want to ascend to the Supreme Court bench? Is that how anyone would want to ascend to the Supreme Court bench? I don't understand how a guy can be in national public office for 173 years and still be so bad at politics. But this thing with pre-announcing a black female nominee, it is such a colossal, unforced error. It's difficult to overstate the severity of it. If you're planning to nominate a black woman, fine. If you're not going to consider anyone else except black women, fine. It's a stupid criterion, but you're the president, so obviously it's your prerogative. But what benefit do you stand to gain by announcing her race and her gender before you announce her identity? A benefit that you would lose if you didn't do that? Where is it? Because I am hard-pressed to think of any. If you didn't do the pre-announcement, wouldn't it be all the more impactful when you ultimately introduced the black female nominee? Wouldn't you then be able to say, we considered lots of judges from lots of different backgrounds, black ones, white ones, men, women, gays, transgenders, Eskimos, amputees, deaf people, midgets. We didn't leave any stone unturned here, and this judge was the absolute best judge we could find. And she just happens to be a black lady. Doesn't that make your nominee seem a lot more impressive than, okay, we had 3 black ladies to choose from, and here's the best one, I guess? I seriously have no idea what political benefit Biden's handlers and the DNC thought they would be gaining by the pre-announcement that the nominee was going to be a black female. And we still haven't even talked about the biggest problem with this arrangement they've chosen, because not only does it make your nominee come off looking like an unexceptional quota hire when you do it this way, but it also quite possibly is against the law. In case the Biden administration didn't get the memo, racial and sex preferences in federal hiring have been illegal since the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1965. Well, except when it's required by law, that is, which is to say, if you're hiring for an agency that has affirmative action quotas in place, then you have to make your hiring choices on the basis of race and sex until you get to the quota. But in the absence of such a quota, then it's 100% verboten to have any sort of racial official litmus test. Needless to say, the Supreme Court is not subject to any affirmative action hiring quotas. And if a president were to stride up to the podium and announce, all right, we've got a Supreme Court vacancy, and I promise my nominee will be a white male Christian heterosexual, and nobody would question the fact that that was illegal and unconscionable. But nothing about the equation is different just because you swap out white male for black woman, nor should it be. I think if I was a black woman judge and Joe Biden offered me this nomination, I wouldn't take it. Who wants to be the first diversity hire on the Supreme Court? Who wants to reach the pinnacle of their profession on the basis of their skin color? Better yet, who wants to be Joe Biden's race beard? Who wants to be the poster girl for this man's desperate need to pander to the core constituencies that he sees slipping away day by day, just like all his other bases of support? According to a survey that came out just today, an astonishing 50% of black voters want Biden impeached. Which stands to reason on the one hand, since Joe Biden has made more racially offensive statements about black people than all other living politicians combined. Though on the other hand, it does make one wonder why they voted for him in the first place, since a former segregationist senator will always be a former segregationist senator. And, frankly, I'm surprised the pool of qualified black female judges is seemingly such a small one, because according to television, for the past 20 to 25 years, every judge everywhere is a strong, powerful black woman. Seriously, when's the last time you saw a courtroom scene in a TV show where the judge wasn't a strong, powerful black woman? It's like the #1 most common television trope in the 21st century. And here's the closing thought for tonight. If we are being bombarded these last 2 years, as we most assuredly have been bombarded, with a narrative that says black Americans, here in the 3rd decade of the 21st century, are so incredibly bad off that not much of anything has changed since Reconstruction and Jim Crow, then by itself, isn't that a tacit admission that affirmative action has failed utterly at doing any of the things it sought to do? Because they can't have it both ways. They have to pick the one or the other. And I think we will leave it there for tonight. I hope your week is off to an agreeable start. I will see you Wednesday. Here's wishing everyone a pleasant tomorrow. Until next time, do not comply. Get off my lawn.